Greetings and welcome back to Haftarot, our weekly video cast in which we take a look at the coming week's Haftara, understand what its basic message is, and to see what its connection may be with that week's Parasha. This week we have a fairly easy job. The Haftara is from the second chapter of the first book of Melachim. It's the first 12 verses of that relatively long chapter, and it is David's essential last will and testament on his deathbed, the charges and the directives that he gives to Shlomo, who's going to take over for him. And the association with this week's parasha is straightforward. Parashat Vayhi is made up really of three components. The first component is Yosef's special deathbed charge, that involves the bracha to Menashe and Ephraim, or the bracha to Yosef through Menashe and Ephraim. The last section is the funeral cortege of Yaakov and what follows that. And the middle section of it is Yaakov's deathbed wishes, commands, brachot to all of his sons, which include a lot of indications about where they're going to be inheriting in the land, etc. And we find these sort of last will and testaments, if you will, in several places in Bereshit. We find it when Yitzchak thinks he's going to die, and he asks Esav to go get him food so that he can give him a blessing, and that's where the famous scene of the switched brachot, as it were, the stolen brachot, come up. There is, of course, in our parasha, when Yaakov gives the deathbed blessing to Reuven, Shimon, Levi together, Yehuda makes him the king, etc. And of course, famously, there is the Kriyah that we read at the very end of the Torah. In our custom, we read it on Simchat Torah, and that is V'zot HaBracha, Shebrach Moshe Ish Elohim at Bnei Yisrael, critically, Lifnei Moto. So the notion that when somebody is about to die, that they want to give some sort of a bracha to the generation that's going to succeed them, to the person or persons who are going to take their place, is something that's well entrenched here. We don't really find more of them in Tanakh, except here and there, little wishes for people, but nothing in a significant way beyond this. But we do find it in the case of David. But what's different is that when you look at David's, and I have this on the note here, when you look at David's farewell charge to Shlomo, it is not nearly the same kind of well-wishing or wishing that God will give him great bounty or great success, but rather it seems to be putting affairs in order. And so David starts out by saying that I'm going the way of the land, I'm going to die, and you have to be strong and keep the mitzvot, etc. And then almost immediately, when you get to Pasuk Hey, means we have only had to have 4 psukim, he talks about Yoav, David's cousin, who was his chief of staff, and Yoav killed 2 different people. So he killed a lot of people, and he killed 2 different people. One of them, Avner, who was Shaul's cousin and chief of staff. He killed Avner in revenge for Avner's killing Asael, Yoav's younger brother. And he also killed Amasa, who had been Avshalom's chief of staff, and David then made him his chief of staff as a way of creating some sort of a detente between the 2 camps after Avshalom's failed rebellion. And Yoav killed them both, and David felt incapable of taking Yoav on, but he told Shlomo to take care of that piece of business. And then he told him to take care of Barzillai Hagiladi, but he then pointed out that Shimi ben Gera, who was the member of Shevet Binyamin, who had cursed David when he was leaving Yerushalayim, running away from Avshalom, and thrown rocks at him, and accused him of now getting his comeuppance for his bloody rebellion against Shaul in his terms, that David, on the way back, had promised Shimi he wouldn't kill him, but he now tells Shlomo to take care of that piece of business. By the way, Shlomo takes care of both of them immediately in Perek Bet. At least we hear about it immediately. And then we get David's death, his burial in Ir David, and the classic Melachim form of the quick biography of how long he ruled. He ruled in Hebron for 7 years, in Yerushalayim for 33 years, and that Shlomo took over for him. and Shlomo's kingdom is firmly based. When we read the rest of Perek Bet, we see that Shlomo does take David's advice to heart. He also ends up killing one of his brothers, Adoniyahu. And so the rest of Perek Bet is kind of a bloody Perek in which Shlomo is putting his house in order by taking out the people who either were threats to David or are threats to him. And at that point, his kingdom is firmly entrenched, firmly saved. It does show us, it highlights for us, and in a sense, this Haftara comes not just as a pairing with our Parsha, but as very much of a symmetrical opposite. It does show us the critical difference between being the head of a family and the great wishes that you can wish for your family members and that they be successful in everything they do to your sons, your daughters, your grandchildren, as opposed to a king. That when a king takes over, especially in the tumultuous times that existed of separate tribes united under one kingdom, but with kind of a fraying relationship, that there it's not all sweet and pleasant and warm and fuzzy. There are some very hard and upsetting decisions that have to be made, and that's part of the burden of the monarchy that we read about in this Haftara. In any case, this brings us to the conclusion not only of this particular parasha and story, but of the Haftarot on Sefer Bereshit. Next week, we're going to start looking at the Haftarot on Sefer Shmot, which is going to be a very different kettle of fish, as they like to say, because, of course, the themes in Sefer Shmot are very different. As we move from Sefer Toladot, Bereshit is a book of genealogies and a book of history of the formation of Am Yisrael. Sefer Shmot is Sefer HaGeulah, the book of redemption, and as such, many of the Haftarot will ring with that particular tune. Everybody should have a wonderful Shabbat.